Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. I wanted to dedicate an episode to some unusual factoids from the raw contact. Jim Mccarty has stated in a number of interviews and on the LL Research website. Some of these are absolutely fascinating, and while unimportant, I think it deserves discussion. At the end of this, I'm also going to read some sections of the Law of One that were originally removed, including a sort of controversial section about the U.S. space program. Jim discusses this, saying that these factoids are from the Camelot Journal that I've continued to write since Carla was unable to write after her surgeries in 2011. She started the Camelot Journal back in 2005. She was invited to go to England to be in a friend's wedding. She was a member of the Baha'i, so Carla was her witness, which is sort of like a maid of honor or best man at a wedding. So while she was in England, she had 5 chances to speak to different people about the Law of One, different groups. She thought she'd keep a little journal and let people know what she did after she got back. Then after she got back, it's such a good idea. I think I'm going to keep the journal going so that folks will know what a day in the life of LL Research is like. So for the next 5 years, that is what she did. When her surgeries rolled around, the first surgery went pretty well, so she was able to take the journal back after I did it for a little while. After the second surgery, the lower back surgery in April of 2015, she tried it for a while, but in June, I took it over, Mccarty says. I've been keeping it up ever since, but I changed a little bit. I've kind of used the first part of it as a, shall we say, teach-learning device, commenting on various books that I've read, and I went through all of her books, Secrets of UFOs, Wanderer's Handbook, Law of One 101, and some things by Joel Goldsmith. Then I finally figured out, maybe I should say something about the Law of One. So last December, I started going through the various sessions and finding questions and answers there. And these I pulled out because they're kind of unusual. So starting off first from session number 16, question number 47, 48, and 49. Questioner, can you tell me of the silver flecks that we have found sometimes on our faces or elsewhere? I am Ra. These of which you speak are a materialization of a subjectively oriented signpost indicating to one mind-body-spirit complex and no other a meaning of subjective nature. Questioner, who creates the silver flakes? Are they real? Ra, I am Ra. Picture, if you will, the increasing potential for learned teaching. At some point, a sign will be given to indicate the appropriateness or importance of that learned teaching. The entity itself, in cooperation with the inner planes, creates whatever signpost is most understandable or noticeable to it. Questioner, you're saying that we ourselves then create these? I am Ra. Entities consciously do not create these. The roots of mind complex, having touched in understanding, intelligent infinity, create them. Before I joined Don and Carla, Mccarty says, the only indications I ever got of the rightness of any important action that I was considering was that still small voice inside would give me direction. I think that's probably true for most people, so I was intrigued with the silver fleck phenomena that Don and Carla experienced for some years before I joined them. The silver flecks would appear somewhere on one of our bodies as we were talking about decisions of a spiritual nature we were considering. Fleck would often be hexagonal and only about 1/8 of an inch across. This would be our indication for our subconscious minds that a certain course of action was appropriate for the one of us with the question and the silver fleck. Questions 352. Question, did you ever keep any? Answer, yeah, I've still got some. They did survive all right? Jim says, yeah, they don't dematerialize. Okay, thank you. Where do you keep them? In a jar? Yeah, in a little plastic jar with a lid on it in my bedroom. Where would you keep them? Any idea they're made of? No, I've never had them analyzed. They look like silver. Can we have a show and tell? Sure, a little later on. I've also seen documentaries where gold flecks have appeared during healings and things like that. The same type of thing. I would assume so. There's a lady that Dawn saw at UFO conference in Laramie, Wyoming that Dr. Sprinkle was hosting, and she was covered in silver flecks. So it's not just a few people that happen, it's some sort of phenomenon that's been in existence for a while. We've asked more than this, There's so many things we could have asked about. So these showed up on all three of you? Yeah, Jim says, at one time or another. But they happened first with Don and Carla. They only happened to me after I joined them. So you caught silver flecks from them? Jim says, I caught silver flecks. Yeah, I might have been cured. I haven't caught any in a long time. Session 26, question number 20. Questioner. Thank you. In the recent past, of the last 30 to 40 years, the UFO phenomenon has become known to our population. I know they've been UFOs throughout history, but what was the original reason for the increase in what we call UFO activity in the past 40 years? Ra says, I am Ra. Information which Confederation sources had offered to your entity, Albert Einstein, became perverted, and instruments of destruction began to be created, examples of this being the Manhattan Project and its product. Information offered through wanderer sound vibration Nikola Tesla also being experimented with for potential destruction, example your so-called Philadelphia experiment. Thus, we felt a strong need to involve our thought forms in whatever way we of the Confederation could be of service in order to balance these distortions of information meant to aid your planetary sphere. The Manhattan Project used the basic information received by Albert Einstein and developed the atomic bomb which dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, and killed 220,000 people. Those of Ra were able to aid those who died, not from the radiation, but from the trauma of energy release by ensuring that the mind-body-spirit complexes remained intact and did not disintegrate without any chance of reintegration. If those of Ra had not aided these entities, they would no longer have been entities and would have been a loss to the Creator, a part of the Creator. As a side note, that's an amazing fact that we should be aware of, that death by nuclear bomb can mean complete and utter death, meaning that you don't reincarnate, you don't move on beyond that point. In October of 1943, the U.S. Navy conducted experiments that Nikola Tesla received that combined electromagnetic radiation and gravity into a single field. That supposedly caused light to bend around the U.S. Navy destroyer escort ship, the USS Eldridge, rendering it completely invisible for a short period of time. The U.S. Navy denies any such experiments ever took place. Because the Confederation felt the information which they had offered Albert Einstein and Nikola Tesla had been perverted, they also felt the UFO phenomenon would help to balance the distortion caused by this information. The UFO phenomenon has always had the purpose of causing people to consider the concepts of infinity and mystery. Thinking deeply upon these concepts often is the beginning of the spiritual journey for those willing to ask the basic questions of life. What is life? Where am I going in my life? Is there a creator? And so forth. That is still the hopeful outcome of this day. Raw session number 33, question number 21. Then I will ask if there is anything we can do to make the instrument more comfortable or improve the contact. Ra answers that this is working well. You are attempting to be conscientious. We thank you. May we say we enjoyed your vision of our social memory complex drinking one of your liquids while speaking through this instrument. I am Ra. I leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth then, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one infinite Creator, Adonai. Mccarty explains in this session, Ra mentioned how they enjoyed our vision of our social memory drinking one of your liquids while speaking through this instrument. The night before this contact, the three of us were sitting around the kitchen table imagining how those of Ra would become aware that we were ready to contact them. One of us came up with the comical idea. There were probably 6th-density teenagers cursing the galaxy in their equivalent of a UFO convertible, drinking a beer. When our call came in, one of them will ask the others, who wants to talk to them this time? Laughs. Just a guess. Raw session number 47, question number 13. What stimulus would create what we call an earthbound spirit or lingering ghost? Ra says, I am Ra. The stimulus for this is the faculty of the will. If the will of the yellow ray mind-body spirit is that which is stronger than the progressive impetus of the physical death toward the realization of that which comes, that is, if the will is concentrated enough upon the previous experience, the entity's shell of yellow ray, though no longer activated, cannot either be completely deactivated, and until the will is released, the mind-body-spirit complex is caught. This often occurs, as we see you are aware, in the case of sudden death, as well in the case of extreme concern for a thing or another self. When Carla first moved into the apartment on Douglas Boulevard that she would eventually share with Don for 12 years, there was a spirit of an older woman who was very distressed and agitated. Carla was able to contact her and found out that the woman was worried about her wild and careless son, about what happened to him without her present in life. Carla found from neighbors that the boy had grown up to be responsible and was well, living in another part of town. When Carla was able to communicate this information to the woman, her ghost seemed to vanish immediately and was not heard from again. From session number 53, question number 3. First, I will ask if you could tell me the affiliation of the entities that contacted Betty Andreasson. Ra says, this query is marginal. We will make the concession towards information with some loss of polarity due to free will being abridged. We request that questions of this nature be kept to a minimum. The entities in this and some other vividly remembered cases are those who, feeling the need to plant Confederation imagery in such a way as not to abrogate free will, use the symbols of death, resurrection, love, and peace as a means of creating upon the thought level the time-space illusion of a systematic train of events which give the message of love and hope. This type of contact is chosen by careful consideration of Confederation members which are contacting an entity of like home vibration, if you will. This project then goes before the Council of Saturn, and if approved is completed. The characteristics of this type of contact include the non-painful nature of thoughts experienced and the message content which speaks not of the doom but of the new dawning age. In this question, Don is concerned in Book 1 of the Law of One, the raw material. There was too much information about negatively oriented extraterrestrial contact with people on Earth. He wanted to get a more balanced view of both positive and negative contact, so he asked this question about a famous abduction case called the Andreasson Affair. On the evening of January 25, 1967, Betty Andreasson was abducted by positively oriented entities from in front of her family of 7 children and her father, all of whom were placed in a state of suspended animation while she was taken on board the entity's craft and taken to a being of light called the One. Betty was devout Christian, and here Ross suggests that she was also a wanderer of the same home density vibration as the entities who abducted her. They told her that she would forget the inspiring images of peace, love, hope, and the new dawning age until the proper time when she would be able to share it with others. After the initial shock of seeing these entities come through her walls from their craft outside her house, she was able to feel a great friendship and mutual love for them, and from them for her. One of them stayed behind to watch over the family while she was gone. Most of what Betty experienced and later recalled under hypnosis was a state of rapture from which she had great difficulty describing to the hypnotist all that was occurring to her. She said that the Father loves us all so very much, so also that she could see the people who had no love had nothing at all, that love was the answer to every problem. She said that this experience was being recorded in her heart and that she would be able to share it at another time. She had indeed been implanted with a message of love and hope. There are a couple more describing her experiences, but as far as I know, she hasn't had the full revelation yet. That will happen, so it will to come. Another question, why was the answer preceded by the don't mess up the polarity or whatever? Ross says, well, the specific information of a nature that may not have a lot of application to you or anyone's spiritual development. It's nice to know that somebody else had an experience that was terribly enlightening, but it's the kind of information that if kept asking questions like that wouldn't give us information that would help everybody else involved in mind, body, and spirit. It's called transient kind of information. It's of the moment of interest only. So what we need to focus on is the eternal principles. They'll be good now and in 10,000 years or 10 million years from now. From session number 53, question number 23. Can you comment on Mai and the instrument if she approves so-called ball of lightning experience as a child? Ra said, I am Ra. You were being visited by your people to be wished well. When Carla was about 1 year old, her mother put her down in a cradle some distance from an open window as a thunderstorm was going on outside. When she was older, her mother told that small ball of lightning came in the window and circled her crib 1.5 times before going out the window. Some years later, Carla had told the story to Don. He said the same thing had happened to him. His mother told him about it, but she didn't have any details to go with it. I would guess that most wanderers have kind of a contact with those from their home planet, especially in the early years, to not only be wished well, but to be given reassurance that this life that they have chosen to undertake on Earth at this time is very important to them and to everyone, and it is well worth all of the effort that will be required of them to complete it successfully. Question: did I understand it then? They don't have the same people reading them? Jim says not necessarily. They both had their people reading them. We never knew who was from where. Question: they did it in the same way, so that what made me wonder, were they from the same planet? Jim said, well, that's a piece of evidence that suggests they were. There's all kinds of other evidence throughout the Ra contact that Ra would never say which of us was from where, so there's all kinds of possibilities. Did you ever have an experience like that as a child? They asked Jim. Not like that. Jim says basically it was either before I was born or while I was still in the womb or just after, somewhere around there. I can remember exactly when I must have been somewhat apprehensive. The message I got was, it's okay. You won't get lost. You can come back. So it had to be somewhat close to birth. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Please no, he said. Questioner: it's interesting to me they each had a circle and a half, which didn't, when you had the sessions, you did a circle around Carla 3 times. Jim said, yeah, it took about 3 times to say the ritual words. So 1.5 and 1.5 is 3. Well, you're the first person that ever put that together. Thank you. Question: I mean, it just struck me now that it was a sign, because it was like they were separated. But of course, higher beings know that would future get together and do their work in, 3 times, but you didn't plan it would be 3 times. It took 3 times. Yeah, we didn't say, well, let's walk 3 times and get the words in. Question from the Raw session 104, number 25. When we got our introduction back from the publisher to the book, which was originally called The Law of One, in the introduction, Carla had been speaking of reincarnation, and there was a sentence added. It said, for although originally part of Jesus' teachings, they were censored from all subsequent editions by the Empress. Would Ra please comment on the source of that being placed in our introduction? I am Ra. This follows the way of subjectively interesting happenings, conditions, circumstances, or coincidence. Not a lot of help with that one. We always thought that the insertion of this sentence into the introduction that we had written for the raw material was quite amazing. What human hand at our publishers would bother to insert this fact, much less even know about it? The Empress is Theodora, Emperor Justinian's wife. Justinian ruled over the Eastern Roman Empire from Constantinople. Theodora was master manipulator who worked her way up from a prostitute on the streets to a concubine for the emperor, to his favorite concubine, to his wife in 523 AD. It was a custom within the Roman Empire to deify all previous Roman emperors and their empresses. But at this time, the Christian religion counted reincarnation as a cornerstone of its religion, and how could Theodora ever be deified and eternally worshipped as a goddess if everyone was to be reborn? So set about granting pardons to heretical monks, who then set about doing her bidding, as the doctrine of reincarnation was removed from church dogma at the Senate of the Eastern Church of Constantinople, 543 AD. Subjectively interesting indeed. Questioner: so you never found out the physical plane answer to that question? No, it just has to have appeared there. Somehow somebody manipulated the printing press. Jim says the teachings of reincarnation were originally part of the Bible, part of Jesus' teachings. And in various places in there, the Bible, who do people say I am? Some say you're Elijah, some say you're Moses. So there's still some places where you can see remnants of reincarnation, 3 or 4 like that. Lastly, but not least, from session number 24, question number 19. It's not too important, but I would really be interested to know if Dwight Eisenhower met with either the Confederation or the Orion Group during the 1950s, or at that time. I am Ra. The one in which you speak met with thought forms which are indistinguishable from third density. This was a test. We, the Confederation, wished to see what would occur if this extremely positively oriented and simple congenial person, with no significant distortions towards power, happened across peaceful information and the possibilities which might append therefrom. We discovered that this entity did not feel that those under his care could deal with the concepts of other beings and other philosophies. Thus, an agreement reached then allowed him to go his way, ourselves to do likewise, and a very quiet campaign, as we have heard you call it, to be continued, alerting your peoples to our presence gradually. Events have overtaken this plan. Jim says, I found this an interesting report from the Borderland Research Foundation the other day when I cataloged the UFO contact section. It covers the supposed meeting between President Eisenhower and UFO entities on February 20th, 1954, at the Muroc Dry Lake portion of Edwards Air Force Base in California. Eisenhower was vacationing at his retreat in nearby Palm Springs at the time, and the excuse that was given for his 4 hours of disappearance was that he had a chipped tooth on a chicken bone while eating dinner and had went to see a dentist. Gerald Light was one of the group of dignitaries and scientists who witnessed the alien contact over a period of 48 hours. He wrote a letter about his experience to Meade Lane, a friend and fellow UFO contactee, and began his letter by saying, I have just returned from Muroc. The report is true, devastatingly true. He went on to say how he witnessed 5 separate and distinct types of aircraft being studied and handled by our Air Force officials with the assistance and permission of the Etherians. He further reported how he witnessed the materialization and dematerialization of various of these craft and their occupants. His response was, I could not stifle away the pity that arose in my own being as I watched the pathetic bewilderment of rather brilliant brains struggling to make some sort of rational explanation would enable them to retain their familiar theories and concepts. He was certain that President Eisenhower would make a national television announcement within 2 months to describe the aliens, offered cooperation with the United States government. But as it turned out, President Eisenhower chose to listen to the Council of the Military, the industrial, and the religious groups that had put him in office, reflecting their feeling that the American public would be thrown into chaos with the knowledge of other beings from elsewhere. I wonder what Ra meant by events have overtaken this plan. The plan was to gradually alert Earth's people that those from the Confederation were here, and I'm guessing that the Orion Group had plans of their own that involved sightings and abductions to generate the feelings of fear and doom that they feed upon, and they would pursue this plan at their own pace. Don't you just wonder what kind of world we would be living in now if President Eisenhower had made the announcement to the American people? As Jim was presenting this, someone asked him a question. If things happened then, would that affect the outcome of harvest later in a detrimental way or a positive way? Jim says, who knows? Anything is possible. Ra still says that anything is possible. If you remember session 65, they're talking about the choices that planet Earth has to make is like going into a grocery store and seeing the various things that people can have breakfast on. They're going to have breakfast. Whether we choose this or that breakfast is up to us. Even though it doesn't look like we're doing very well, there's still a possibility that one fine, strong moment of inspiration when we choose the positive polarization, not probable, but ever possible. Now, moving on to another fragment, Jim explains, early in the raw contact, we received answers to our questions which fell into a controversial portion of our third density illusion. Almost everyone at some point within the study of the paranormal spends some time being fascinated by the so-called conspiracy theories, which have generally to do with the supposedly unseen groups and individuals who are said to be the real powers behind governments and their activities in the world today. Such theories usually hold that the news reports that we hear and read concerning politics, economics, the military, and so forth are but the tip of the very large iceberg that is mainly to do with various schemes for world domination and which function through the secret activities of this small elite group of human beings and their alien allies. The following information falls into this category and resulted from a follow-up question Don asked about UFOs and their sources. You will note Don's incredulous attitude throughout this portion of his questioning. It was our decision to remove this information from Book 1 of the Law of One. because we felt it to be entirely unimportant and of a transient nature, since knowing it adds nothing to one's ability or desire to seek the truth and the nature of the evolutionary process, whether the information is true or not. In fact, knowing and continuing to seek this kind of information can become a major stumbling block to one's spiritual journey, because it removes one's attention from the eternal truths, which may serve anyone's journey at any time, and places it upon that which is only of fleeting interest and of little use spiritually. Concentrating on conspiracy theories and their participants tends to reinforce the illusion of separation and ignores the love that binds all things as one being. If we had continued to pursue this particular line of questioning, or any other line of questioning of a transient nature, we would soon have lost the contact with those of Ra, because as Ra mentioned in the very first session, Ra communicated with us through a narrow band of vibration or wavelength. Through various clues that Ra gave us when Dawn asked about the alignments at the end of each session, we were able to determine that this narrow band meant that only information of the purest and most precise nature concerning the process of the evolution of mind, body, and spirit could be successfully transmitted on a sustainable basis through our instrument. To ask Ra questions of a transient nature would be like trying to run a finely tuned engine on crude petroleum. Many groups become fascinated with transient information of a specific mundane nature and have their information polluted by negative entities who gradually replace the positive entities that began their contact. Pursuing information of this kind is like moving the dial on your radio so that you end up with another station altogether from the one in which you began. This change in desire for the kind of information that the group seeks from its contact is the signal to that contact that it has to offer is no longer desired, and the law of free will requires that only hints of this detuning process be given to the group, so that all choices that the group makes are totally a product of free will. When a group continues to seek the transient information, the positive contact gives hints here and there that such information is not of importance. But when the group persists in seeking this kind of information, the positive contact, in order to observe the free will of the group, must slowly withdraw and is then eventually replaced by a negative contact, which is only too happy to give this kind of information, but with less desire for accuracy and with maximal desire to remove the group from the ranks of those who serve others. When the group has been discredited by false information such as dates of future disasters, which are publicized by the group, and then do not occur, then the negative entities have been successful in removing the power of the group's light and have gathered it for themselves. We still feel that this information is totally unimportant, and the only reason that we include it now is to show how easy it is for a group to get off the track, shall we say, and to lose the focus of desire for that which is important and that which the group began. The desire to serve others by gathering information which may aid in the evolution of mind, body, and spirit. 10,000 years from now, it will not matter one whit who did what to whom on this tiny speck of whirling dust. All that will matter is that love may be found at any time in every person and particle of the one creation or any illusion thereof. Hopefully, information gained through any effort such as the raw contact will help some of the third density entities to discover more of the truth and to move one step further on their evolutionary journey to the one creator. Carla also mentions in regards to this material, all I can add to this is a plea to all official sources. We do not know anything. We are not in on any conspiracies, and please don't zap our telephones again. When Don and I joined Andrea Puharich for a mind link in 1977, we caught the attention of some agency who played havoc with our telephone system, and how utterly without use to listen in to our conversations. Mystics seldom plot. We honestly don't care about this stuff and just stumbled into it by accident. Carla says, I like to point out the way those of Ra seem here somewhat off balance compared to their usual steady selves. It is subtle, but easy to see the opening to each answer is normally I am Ra. Several times in this fragment, however, that signature is missing. The contact was going slightly out of tune here, I think due to the information's transient nature. This is the fragment that they removed. Session 8, January 26, 1981. Questioner: there was a portion of the material from yesterday which I will read where you say there is a certain amount of landing taking place. Some of these landings are of your own people, some are of the group known to you as Orion. My first question is, what did you mean that some of the landings are of your peoples? Ra, I am Ra. Your peoples have at this time-space present the technological achievement, if you would call it that, of being able to create and fly the shape and type of craft known to you as unidentified flying objects. Unfortunately, for the social memory complex vibratory rate of your peoples, these devices are not intended for the service of mankind, but for potential destructive use. This further muddles the vibratory nexus of your social memory complex, causing a situation where neither those oriented towards serving others nor those oriented towards serving self can gain the energy power which opens the gates to intelligent infinity for the social memory complex. This in turn causes the harvest to be small. Questioner: are these craft that are from our peoples, from what we call planes, that are not incarnate at this time, where are they based? I am Ra. These of which we spoke are of third density and are part of the so-called military complex of various of your people's societal divisions or structures. The bases are varied. There are bases, as you would call them, undersea in your southern waters near the Bahamas, as well as in your Pacific seas in various places close to your Chilean borders on the water. There are bases upon your moon, as you call this satellite, which are at this time being reworked. There are bases which move about your lands. There are bases, if you would call them that, in your skies. There are bases of your peoples, very numerous, and we have said potentially destructive. Questioner: where do these people who operate these craft come from? Are they affiliated with any nation on Earth? What is their source? Ra says these people come from the same place as you or I. They come from the Creator. As you intend the question in its shallower aspect, these people are those in your and other selves governments responsible for what you would term national security. Questioner: am I to understand then that the United States has these craft in undersea bases? I am Ra, you are correct. Questioner: how did the United States learn the technology to build these craft? I am Ra. There was a mind-body-spirit complex known to your people by the vibratory sound complex, Nicola. This entity departed the illusion, and the papers containing the necessary understandings were taken by mind-body-spirit complexes serving your security of national divisional complex. Thus, your people became privy to the basic technology. In the case of those mind-body-spirit complexes, which you call Russians, the technology was given from one of the Confederation in an attempt approximately 27 of your years ago to share information and bring about peace among your peoples. The entities giving this information were in error, but we did many things at the end of this cycle in attempt to aid your harvest, from which we learned the folly of certain types of aid. That is a contributing factor to our more cautious approach at this date, even as the need is power upon power greater, and your people's call is greater and greater. Questioner: I'm puzzled by these craft which have undersea bases. Is this technology sufficient to overshadow all other armaments? Do we have the ability to just fly in these craft, or are they just craft for transport? What is the basic mechanism of their power source? It's really hard to believe, is what I'm saying. I am Ra. The craft are perhaps misnamed in some instances. It would be more appropriate to consider them as weaponry. The energy used is that of the field of electromagnetic energy which polarizes the Earth's sphere. The weaponry is of two basic kinds, that which is called by your people's psychotronic and that which is called by your people's particle beam. The amount of destruction which is contained in this technology is considerable, and the weapons have been used in many cases to alter weather patterns and to enhance the vibratory change which engulfs your planet at this time. Question: how have they been able to keep this secret? Why aren't these craft in use for transport? Ra says the governments of each of your societal division Illusions desire to refrain from publicity so that the surprise may be retained in case of hostile action from what your peoples call enemies. Question: how many of these craft does the United States have? Ra: I am Ra. The United States has 573 at this time. They are in the process of adding to this number. Question: what is the maximum speed of one of these craft? I am Ra. The maximum speed of these craft is equal to the Earth energy squared. This field varies. The limit is approximately 1/2 the light speed, as you would call it. This is due to imperfections in design. Question: would this type of craft come close to solving many of the energy problems as far as transport goes? I am Ra. The technology your peoples possess at this time is capable of resolving each and every limitation which plagues your social memory complex at this present nexus of experience. However, the concerns of some of your beings with distortions towards what you would call powerful energy cause these solutions to be withheld until the solutions are so needed that those with the distortion can then become further distorted in the direction of power. Question: you also said that some of the landings at this time were of the Orion Group. Why did the Orion Group land here? What is their purpose? I am Ra. Their purpose is conquest, unlike those of the Confederation who wait for the calling. The so-called Orion Group calls itself to conquest. Question: specifically, what do they do when they land? Ra says there are two types of landings. In the first, entities among your peoples are taken on their craft and programmed for future use. There are 2 or 3 levels of programming. First, the level that will be discovered by those who do research. Second, a triggering program. Third, a second and most deep triggering program, crystallizing the entity, thereby rendering it lifeless and useful as a kind of beacon. This is a form of landing. The second form is that of landing beneath the Earth's crust, which is entered from water, again in the general area of your South American and Caribbean areas, and close to the so-called Northern Pole. The bases of these people are underground. Question: the most startling information that you have given me, which I must admit that I'm having difficult believing, is that the United States has 573 craft of the type which you described. How many people of United States designation are aware of these craft, including those who operate them? I am Ra. The number of your peoples varies, for there are needs to communicate at this particular time-space nexus, so that the number is expanding at this time. The approximate number is 1,500. It is only approximate, for as your illusory time-space continuum moves from present to present at this nexus, many are learning. Question: where are these craft constructed? Ra says these craft are constructed one by one in 2 locations, in the desert or arid regions of your so-called New Mexico, and in the desert or arid regions of your so-called Mexico, both installations being underground. Question: am I to believe the United States actually has a manufacturing plant in Mexico? I am Ra. I spoke thusly. May I at this time reiterate that this type of information is very shallow and of no particular consequence compared to the study of the Law of One. However, we carefully watch these developments in hopes that your peoples are able to be harvested in peace. Question: I'm totally aware that this line of questioning is of no consequence at all. But this particular information is so startling to me that it makes me question your validity on this. Up until this point, I was in agreement with everything you had said. This is very startling to me. It just does not seem possible to me that this secret could have been kept for 27 years and that we are operating these craft. I apologize for my attitude, but I thought that I would be very honest. It is unbelievable to me that we would operate a plant in Mexico outside of the United States to build these craft. Maybe I'm mistaken. These craft are physical craft built by physical people? Could I go and get in one and ride in one? Is that correct? I am Ra. This is incorrect. You could not ride one. The United States, as you call your society divisional complex, creates these as a type of weapon. So there are no occupants then. No pilot, shall I say? I am Ra. This is correct. Question: how are they controlled? They are controlled by computer from a remote source of data. Why do we have a plant in Mexico? I am Ra. The necessity is both for dryness of the ground and for a near total lack of population. Therefore, your so-called government and the so-called government of your neighboring geographical vicinity arranged for an underground installation. The government officials who agreed did not know the use to which their land would be put, but thought it a governmental research installation for use in what you would call bacteriological warfare. Is this type of craft that Dan Fry was transported in? I am Ra. The one known as Daniel was in thought form transported by Confederation thought form vehicular illusion in order to give this mind-body-spirit complex data so that we might see how this type of contact aided your people in the uncovering of the intelligent infinity behind the illusion of limits. Question: the reason that I have questioned you so much and so carefully about the craft which you say the United States government operates is that if we include this in the book, it will create numerous problems. It is something that I am considering leaving out of the book entirely, or I am going to have to question you in considerable detail about it. It's difficult to even question in this area, but I would like to ask a few more questions about it with the possible option of leaving it in the book. What is the diameter of the craft which the United States has? I am Ra. I suggest this be the last question for this session. We will speak to you as you deem fit in further sessions, asking you to be guided by your own discernment only. The approximate diameter given several model changes is 23 of your feet as you measure. There are a variety of other very interesting fragments that were removed from the Law of One material that you may have read. If you listen to the classic that is on Audible or go through the normal sessions, none of this stuff is there. So you can find it on LL Research. It's fragments omitted from the first 4 books with commentary by Jim Mccarty and Carla Ruckert, and they talk about why the stuff was omitted. There's a bunch of interesting information, including the use of LSD and how it affected the channelings at different times, and the fact that they had reincarnated from what appears to be the same planet. And they asked some questions that I had always wondered why they didn't ask, that they did ask. So you can understand from this information, they were being guided to ask appropriate questions. One of the frustrating things about reading the raw material is that there are so many questions that were not asked. And I talked about this with Jim Mccarty, and there are certainly questions they should have asked. I would have loved to know more about Venus and the civilization they had, what their houses looked like, what their planet looked like. I want to know more about their history. But they're saying here that would have been irrelevant. It's unimportant. To me, it's important. It's all important. So we have seen this information get distorted a little bit, especially the stuff at the end about secret space bases. It may not be true. As Carla Ruckert points out, the channel might not have been tuned properly. But you get an idea that there has been possibly some sort of secret space organization. And if you want to buy into that, it's certainly possible. And it's interesting, just take this material and take of it what you will. If you are caught up in conspiracies based on any channelings, that channel is most likely negative. If you have a channeling pop up on your Facebook feed and you go to listen to it and it's warning you about a particular event, or it's a doomsday scenario, or it's talking about the secret evil lurking behind the scenes, any of that stuff is not as important as you think it is. There are many spiritual people I meet that start to tell me, oh, there's an evil cabal over here and we must stop them. In fact, there are some very popular authors that focus on this fact. It is not important. It doesn't matter. The key is to find the love in the moment, to learn the workings of the Law of One, to embrace intelligent infinity. And they clearly show this, and they did their best to try to keep the channeling tuned positively, and that's why we don't get as much as we wish, because they didn't ask the questions that many of us would love to have known more about, because there was no need to. It wasn't important. I would love to know if anybody has had the silver fleck phenomenon that is discussed here that I was not aware of, that these silver flecks popped up. Hexagonal silver flecks. And they were able to keep them. It was some way of them knowing that they were on the right path. It seemed very specific to them, and Jim Mccarty says it started happening to him when he joined Don and Carla. A lot of this is inside baseball stuff about the Law of One, and if you've never heard of the Law of One material, this all might seem very complicated, and essentially this episode's not that important. You could skip this one. But for somebody that's super fascinated about the Law of One and its workings and some inner details, I thought you might find it interesting. In any case, you can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.